Okay, so yesterday we used SOHCAHTOA to find missing side lengths, and we learned the ratios, opposite of hypotenuse, etc. Today we're going to look at inverse trig functions. So you can use inverse trig functions to find angle measurements. So yesterday I told you the angle was 25 degrees, and I said find the value of the side length. Today I'll give you two side lengths, and I'll ask you to work backward and tell me what is theta, what is the angle measurement in degrees. Okay, so you will need to know at least two sides of the right triangle. You could know all three, but you only need a minimum of two. So the inverse trig functions, typically the way we'll write them is sine -1, cosine, it looks like to the -1 power, and tangent to the -1. That's what your calculator looks like. A lot of you may have noticed those buttons yesterday. They're right above the sine, cosine, tangent. Now, using words, which for some reason the SAT uses the words, and that is arc, sine, arc, cosine, and arc, tangent. And then usually you'll have like a variable. So if you see those words on the SAT, just know that they are inverse. Sometimes whenever I go over this in my advanced algebra with trig class, because we do trig, this is trigonometry for our unit, and they'll say, oh my gosh, that was just on my SAT and I had no idea what it meant. If you had just taught me that like 2 days earlier, it would have been good. So try to remember those words for your SAT exam. All right, so what happens when you take the inverse is you actually switch the variables and you change the function from a sine to an inverse sine. So you would switch these around, so it would be x equals the inverse sine of y. It's probably going to make more sense when we get to the problems, but same thing with our cosine. If y equals cosine of x, then x equals inverse cosine of y, and x will equal inverse tan of y. So examples 1, A through D, just ask us to find the measure of each angle without using a picture at all. So if they want you to find out what B, sine of what angle, will get you 1/2, again, all we're going to do is we're going to switch these spots around so that we will get, and when you switch them, you have to change it to your inverse. So that would be inverse sine of 1/2 equals B. And my pre-calc students should know what that is because that's on the unit circle. But on our calculator, we would use the inverse sine, cosine, and tangent. So again, second sine, and this is our 0.5. We should get 30. It was either 30 or 60, right? Because those are the ones that have the 1/2, but it should be 30. So B equals 30 degrees. And they do ask us to round to the nearest degree, which if it's the nearest degree, that means the nearest whole number, whenever you see that in the directions. Okay? So the next one, we will use the inverse tan of 8/12 is equal to B. So again, in our calculator, we have to press second tangent, 8/12. You don't want to do this on your cell phone. Again, using a real calculator. And we're going to round this to the nearest whole degree. So the 0.6 would round this to be 34 degrees. For some reason, they usually do side lengths. The book will ask you to round side lengths to the nearest tenth, angles to the nearest whole number, nearest degree. Just as something to think about. See if you can find the next two. And if any of you are having trouble with your calculators, just raise your hand. I can come around and show you what buttons to press. You want to make sure you have your calculator out and that you're practicing. Jeremiah, you're in degree mode, right? Because you weren't in here yesterday. Did you get all your homework correct? So if it's in rating mode, you would get every single question. Noah, what'd you get for letter C?
B equals 75 degrees.
Good. And D. Chet, what'd you get for D?
8.
8 degrees. Very good. All right, now the rest of them you're going to see we actually have triangles. So we're going to be given side lengths. And we're going to do what we did yesterday. We're going to label the sides, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. That will tell us which trig function to use by looking at our SOHCAHTOA, and then we'll use the inverse of that. So, based on this x being the angle, this would be my opposite side. This would be my hypotenuse. So again, thinking back to our acronym, SOHCAHTOA, what trig function would I pick? Sine, cosine, or tangent? What did I pick, Marquise? The sine. Okay, so normally it is sine of the angle, x, equals opposite over hypotenuse. That's what we would set up yesterday. But yesterday, the x was on in the fraction, and the angle was given to us. So now, all we have to do is use inverse. So we're going to switch these numbers around and change to an inverse. So sine -1, or arc sine, of 7/9 will equal x. And then that goes in our calculator. Every year some students will say, do I have to show this work if I know I'm going to use the inverse? The answer is no, I don't care. And so a lot of these problems could be done just in your calculator mentally, figuring out what goes in. But if you pick the wrong trig function and you don't show any work for it on a quiz or a test, remember you'll lose all of your points there. So we'll type in inverse sine, and then just type in a division, 7 divided by 9. That's how you put fractions in. And we'll get 50, this is nearest degree again? Yes, so 51 degrees. Label your sides for letter 2B. What would 15 be? Adjacent, hypotenuse, opposite? Marquise? Adjacent. 18 would be my hypotenuse. So we should be choosing, in this case, A and H, cosine. So cosine of x equals 15 over 18. Again, we have to switch these. Eventually, you will have problems mixed up, where you will sometimes use regular sine and sometimes you'll use inverse sine. So a lot of students struggle to know, when do I use inverse sine, and that's when x is the angle. Once I start mixing all the problems. Bless you. And punch that in our calculator. What do we get to the nearest degree? Right. No. 34. Very good. All right, now I'm going to skip over example A right now. I'm going to have you guys do that in a second, but I want to go to example B, because this is one I kind of wish I would have put on the notes yesterday with when we gave you 2 angles. So this one gives you all 3 sides. You only want to use 2 of them. So just like with the angles yesterday, kind of ignored the other angle. Just pick 2 of them. It doesn't matter which 2 you pick. If you want, you could do all 3 of them. You will get the same answer no matter which trig function you use. But whenever it has the question mark, you might want to put an x there just to have a variable. So this would be my opposite, this would be my adjacent, and this would be my hypotenuse. Again, you only need 2 of those. So some students just like to cover up, I don't know, the hypotenuse, or just cover up the leg and just use those. But you can actually do any of them. So you could do sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. And then you would do inverse sine of 68 over 85. And you'll get your answer. You could also do cosine or tangent, because since you have all 3, if you choose inverse cosine, though, you'd have to do adjacent over hypotenuse, which would be 51 over 85. And you also could use inverse tan, which would be 68 over 51. These, all 3, when you type them in the calculator, you don't have to do all 3, just pick one, will get you the same answer, which will get you 53 degrees. So for those of you that struggle, you might just want to scribble out a side and then just use the 2. See if you guys can do A, C and D in this set. And then we'll get some of you to the board to put this on. So example 4, we'll go back, show our work. And so these are right, 28, 72, good. And 23, so those were all good. Okay. Let me pass out your homework.